La isla Necker, este sitio de ensueño en el Caribe con 30 hectáreas de selva y arena como azúcar, es el hogar del Robinson Crusoe de los empresarios.
This is my office, yeah. Tough office. No, I've been lucky. I've always worked from home. It saves time going to and from the office, and it's much nicer. So.
El afortunado propietario de esta isla es Richard Branson, un hombre que comenzó con nada y hoy posee una fortuna personal de más de 3.000 millones de euros, una de las más grandes en Gran Bretaña. La reina de Inglaterra lo nombró caballero. El fundador de Virgin presume su éxito sin aspavientos. Desde las megatiendas Virgin hasta una línea aérea, pasando por ferrocarriles, telefonía celular e incluso turismo espacial. El imperio de Richard Branson está presente en más de 30 países.
I know some people will do a business simply because they think it'll make money. But I think in Richard's case, he has to believe in it as well.
He is known within Virgin as Dr. Yes, just like the famous Dr. No character from James Bond. So he is known as Dr. Yes, and that is because when somebody comes to with an idea, his first instinct is to always say yes.
Richard's entire philosophy of business by taking risks. He has taken enormous risks in business.
Yeah, I think my headmaster, his words to me were, you'll either go to prison or you'll become a millionaire.
Este hombre con el toque de Midas fue un niño problemático y un rezagado sin futuro. Richard Branson nació en 1950. Creció en el campo, en esta casa cerca de Bournemouth, en la costa suroeste de Inglaterra. Su familia era de clase media. Su padre era abogado y su madre azafata. Su hijo los desesperaba. Era disléxico y no sabía leer ni escribir a los 8 años. La disciplina escolar y la amenaza del bastón no producían ningún cambio. Era un burro y se burlaban de él en el salón de clases. Esta es la casa londinense de Johnny James. Hoy escribe libretos para el cineasta Tim Burton. Era el único amigo de Branson en el colegio. Aún recuerda al chico tímido que la pasaba tan mal en deportes como en matemáticas.
He was 2 years behind in his schoolwork, and everybody thought he was a moron, an idiot, because he could not do well in school, and he was considered also to be different to everybody else.
El pequeño Richard se sintió excluido. Supo que tendría que pelear para salir adelante. Así que se forjó la imagen de un ganador. Johnny James tiene pruebas en sus archivos. Branson tenía 12 años cuando escribió estas líneas. El título lo dice todo. Ambición.
That's funny. That is weird. Let's sit down. Poésie. Et je crois de l'école. Et je crois qu'il y a un poème par Richard ici. Walking along corridors with a block of concrete hovering over my head, made of ambition and responsibility.
It became larger and larger every day and more sinister. Will it become gold, or will it collapse and shatter upon me? Or will it rapidly diminish into the distance? Where'd you get it from?
Johnny James.
Johnny James, okay. I think that, I was most likely quite precocious young boy in that I was, I felt from quite a young age that I could change the world, which is, and it felt that I had a responsibility to make a difference.
Para marcar una diferencia, Richard Branson dejó la escuela a los 15 años. Se fue con ánimo de venganza, queriendo que todos le prestaran atención. En 1968, la juventud se rebelaba, ansioso de libertad y nuevas experiencias. Branson lanzó la primera revista para estudiantes, la llamó apropiadamente El Estudiante. Abordaba todos los temas sin censura.
That's the first copy. That's about segregation, political stories. There's the French 68.
Hablaba de drogas y sexo, y funcionó.
This one, the first one, was a big success. It was amazing. It was, we sold 50,000 copies, which is a lot. 50,000. Everybody was like, oh, amazing. You know, how could you? 2 kids, you know. I was 15. Richard was 16.
Para lanzar la revista tomó prestado el sótano de la amiga de su madre. También necesitaba dinero, así que se convirtió en un seductor vendiendo páginas y páginas de anuncios antes de imprimir el primer número. Sus virtudes eran su descaro y su labia.
Even though Richard was 16 years old, he had a very deep voice, you know. And on the phone, he sounded like he was 30 years old on the phone. And he did all his business on the phone.
I rang up, you know, Coca-Cola and, you know, tried to persuade them to give advertising in the magazine. And I failed. I then rang Coca-Cola back and said, well, Pepsi-Cola are interested in taking space. And I succeeded. And so I soon learned that, you know, people react to, you know, competition.
When we released Student Magazine, we needed publicity. We needed people to know that the magazine was coming out. And it was very difficult to get any attention from the press. We used to pretend that people like Mick Jagger were coming over, whoever was a celebrity at the time. And so then the journalists would say, oh, Mick Jagger's coming over. OK, well, I'll come over then, right? So they'd come over, and then Richard would tell them all about the magazine, and of course they'd have to write it down and they'd have to file their story. And Richard would send me out to a phone box, to a public phone, and I would call up and I'd say, hey, it's Mick Jagger here, I can't make it, I just crashed my car or something, you know. And Richard would say, oh, it's Mick on the phone. Oh, he can't come. Damn it, he's crashed his car. Yeah, well, that was one trick.
El joven jefe se topó con un grave problema. No podía pagar a su equipo, y entonces se le ocurrió una gran idea para conseguir mano de obra gratuita.
The idea was to get girls, because we knew if we could get pretty girls, then we could get the guys, and we could get them to work.
Sus fiestas nocturnas eran muy populares por ser tan libres. La revista comenzó a deteriorarse. Los ingresos por publicidad se volvieron tan infrecuentes como su publicación. Branson cerró la revista 3 años después del lanzamiento para pasar a un nuevo proyecto. En los 60, la juventud británica enloquecía con Jimi Hendrix, los Rolling Stones y los Beatles. La nueva idea de Richard Branson era vender discos. Pero de nuevo no tenía ni un penique y consiguió un local faroleando. La saga de Virgin comenzó en esta iglesia.
Well, this is where it all began. Virgin Records really got started properly in this church. Not inside the church, but underneath. There was this big, empty, very smelly room full of graves.
You became Christians?
Yeah. We all became baptized. And he let us use the crypt to store all our records. And this is the crypt here. As you can see, it's very small.
Según la leyenda, el nombre de Virgin surgió entre las nubes de hierba que fumaban en la cripta.
We were sitting in a basement, and there were a bunch of girls between 15 and 16, and we were trying to think of, you know, what we would call our record company, and we came up with either Slip Disc Records or Virgin Records, and one of the girls said, well, jokingly, we're all virgins. Of course, none of them were virgins, and so we thought, let's go for Virgin. And for about 2 years we had real problems trying to get it registered. The authorities thought that the word virgin was rude. And I wrote them long letters saying, it's not rude, it's pure, it's virgin. And in the end they agreed.
La Virgen fue la inspiración del primer logo de la marca. Richard Branson comenzó vendiendo discos por correo. Pronto abrió una tienda, la precursora de las megatiendas Virgin. Branson pidió préstamos, montó tiendas e introdujo innovaciones revolucionarias, como los primeros audífonos gratuitos. El éxito fue inmediato. Nick Powell, cofundador de Virgin y el mejor amigo de Branson, recuerda la inauguración de la primera tienda.
When we came in the 60s, we designed the shops, so to speak, for our friends who, so we had in them water beds. People were allowed to listen to the records before they bought them. We sold various pipe smoking, marijuana pipes.
You could sit there and you could smoke and you could drink and you could listen to music. So, it became like a club, really. It was more a club than a shop.
We didn't make so much money out of it, but it gave an atmosphere to the shops that people liked. But the most important thing, those things are all secondary. We had the records people wanted. We were bringing records in from America, from Japan, from Germany, from all over the world that you couldn't get here, especially, of course, from America.
El lado negativo de su éxito era que sus tiendas eran saqueadas. Discos, audífonos y tornamesas eran robados con frecuencia. Richard Branson y sus amigos estaban fuera de su elemento.
It was disappointing for Richard because, he's actually a very honest person in a funny way. I mean, he can act, he can put on a performance, and he's a good salesman, but he's also very profoundly honest. So he couldn't really understand that other people would steal his records,
Ya volvemos con...
Las deudas se acumularon. A los 21 años, Richard Branson debía $1 millón. El banco se horrorizó, pero él mantuvo la calma. Decidió impresionar a su banquero con una nueva idea.
And a new bank manager came in, and he said to Richard, you're in big trouble, and we're going to go and take your parents' house. We're going to take your shoes from your feet, everything, You have to pay us money back. And Richard knows the law. He said, no, you can't do any of that, I haven't got any money. I can't pay you £1 million. I can't pay you £20. So the bank manager said, what are we going to do? And Richard said, a record label. He said, I know we're going to make it with a record label. So the bank gave him the money for the Virgin record label.
Richard Branson sabía cómo estaban las cosas y sabía deslumbrar a los banqueros. De lo que sí no sabía nada era de música. Para lanzar su disquera invitó a su primo, Simon Draper, quien pronto demostró su habilidad para detectar talentos.
In the beginning, the dynamic was that Richard was the businessman. I mean, he had the big vision. He wasn't particularly interested in music per se, and so there was quite a nice balance where I was quite idealistic and particular about what music we played, signed and made, and tried to create an image for the record label that was strong.
La primera apuesta del sello Virgin fue un auténtico golpe de suerte. Su nombre es Mike Oldfield, un principiante rechazado por las disqueras importantes. Su música con sintetizadores era experimental, pero estas notas cambiaron la vida de Richard Branson para siempre.
A wonderful artist who was only 15 years old called Mike Oldfield brought a tape, and we loved the tape. And he said nobody wanted to put his tape out. And the first album we put out was Tubular Bells, and it became very successful.
Simon Draper, el primo de Richard Branson, había notado al joven compositor, pero nunca imaginó el éxito que llegaría a tener.
But we had a meal the night before. I think it was Nick and Richard and myself. I can't remember who else was there. Just before the record was released, and we all sort of putting a figure on what it might sell, but we had no concept. We had no previous experience of the record business at all, so we had no idea of what a really big record would be. So the figures we put on it were ludicrous, 50,000, 100,000, that would have been huge, and it sold millions, so.
El álbum Campanas Tubulares llegó de inmediato a los primeros lugares de popularidad. Las ventas eran descomunales. Con 13 millones de copias, ocupa el sitio número 11 en la lista de los álbumes más vendidos en Gran Bretaña. Discos Virgin saldó sus deudas en 6 meses. Se la jugaron con Mike Oldfield y ganaron el premio mayor. Richard Branson se volvió millonario a los 23 años de edad.
The profits we made from it, we soon spent on bands which weren't successful, and one problem about being very successful with your first project is you think this is easy, and then you soon find that yes, you were quite lucky, and it's not as easy as one thinks.
Branson cortejó a los principales artistas de la época como Mick Jagger, pero no atrajo a ningún grupo exitoso hasta 1977. El movimiento punk inundaba Gran Bretaña. Un grupo hacía más ruido que los otros, los Sex Pistols. Tocaban rápido y muy fuerte, virando entre un torrente de insultos e incitación para amotinarse. Los jóvenes ingleses los adoraban, pero los amos de la farándula los rechazaron. Por unos 100,000 euros, una bicoca, Branson compró los derechos de su primer álbum, Never Mind the Bollocks.
The reason he signed the Sex Pistols was because they'd said fuck on television and they'd been thrown off the label. This was just, Richard loved this kind of publicity. And then, we had the thing with when the album came out, Never Mind the Bollocks, and some dealer was prosecuted for having sold the record, and Richard loved the whole, it was grist to his mill, the publicity coming from the court case and everything else.
El golpe publicitario más memorable tuvo lugar el día del jubileo de la reina. Desde una embarcación, bajo los balcones de Westminster, los Sex Pistols llamaron a la reina criminal y fascista.
I was on the boat, and ironically, 25 years later, I was sitting next to the Queen at her golden Jubilee birthday in Buckingham Palace, watching Queen playing, and the Queen had, instead of cutting my head off, which she might have done with the Sex Pistols, she'd put a sword on my shoulder and she'd knighted me. So it is a funny life sometimes.
Los Sex Pistols fueron arrestados. La sonrisa del cantante Johnny Rotten fue difundida a todo el mundo. El disco fue un éxito internacional y Virgin se volvió un sello importante.
You have to take some risks in life, and the Sex Pistols changed Virgin. It was it put Virgin on the map, on the world map. It was a risk. It was a calculated risk.
Nada le gusta tanto a Richard Branson que correr riesgos. En 1984, a los 34 años, vivía en una barcaza, dirigía la quinta mayor disquera del mundo y tenía 4,000 empleados. Ya ansiaba un nuevo reto. Hasta sus más allegados se sorprendieron cuando anunció su nuevo proyecto, una aerolínea. La apuesta alarmó a sus amigos y asociados, entre ellos el leal Simon Draper.
I thought that starting an airline was a mad idea, because it had nothing to do with what we were doing and being successful at, and potentially could lose us a lot of money. This is the beginning of the end for me, because this is where it starts to be a big divergence in terms of what you want to do with life and the business and everything. He never liked it if people said, no, don't do that, because that would be like, then it would make him even more want to prove that he could do it.
I hated flying on other people's airlines. I mean, the experience was horrible. You faced blank seats, there was no entertainment system, the staff were not happy. I felt we could do it better.
La apuesta de Branson era demencial. Todo su personal creyó que había enloquecido al tratar de competir con el coloso British Airways con vuelos económicos. Su primera ruta, Londres-Nueva York, fue inaugurada con fanfarrias en la primavera de 1984. Virgin Atlantic despegó con solo un Boeing 747. Branson había rentado la aeronave. Negoció personalmente con los directores de Boeing para cerrar el trato.
I did a deal with Boeing where we just took one second-hand 747. I did a deal that if it didn't work out, I could give them the plane back in 12 months' time. So I protected the downside and we gave it a go.
Pero con solo un avión y una ruta, Virgin Atlantic tuvo una infancia difícil. Sobre todo porque Branson no tenía los presupuestos publicitarios de sus competidores. Para atraer la atención del público, Branson puso su cuerpo en la línea. Su nuevo pasatiempo era volar en globo.
The advantage of a balloon is, you're doing something that's never been done before. I mean, we were trying to be the first to cross the Atlantic. We were trying to be the first to cross the Pacific. We were trying to be the first to fly around the world. And the interest was enormous. If we just sponsored America's Cup or a Formula One, the cost would have been gigantic, and the amount of coverage we would have got, I think, would have been negligible.
En julio de 1987, Virgin construyó el globo más grande del mundo. Branson quería ser el primero en cruzar el Atlántico en globo. Nunca se había intentado un viaje tan épico, a más de 10.000 metros de altura, en una cabina presurizada. El compañero de Branson en el viaje fue este hombre, Pearl Lindstrand, un aeronauta experimentado sabedor de los riesgos que esta aventura implicaría.
A balloon drifts with the wind. If the wind stops, you stop. So you're taking a risk. And most people in his position will hire somebody to take the risk. Richard goes in the balloon himself. He takes the same risk as everybody else, which I admire him for, because if you're sitting with all the money and all the business and all the thousands of people you employ, you think, I'm too valuable to risk my life. But not Richard. He was like the king in 1600. He led the troops from the front. He took the same risk as the soldiers did. Today, the general doesn't. He sits in the bunker.
Luego de 35 horas en el aire, ocurrió un desastre. El globo se estrelló en el mar de Irlanda. La tripulación fue rescatada apenas a tiempo por la Armada Real. Branson y Lindstrand se volvieron héroes, generando una enorme publicidad para Virgin Atlantic.
The transatlantic raised publicity almost £30 million worth on a very minor investment. So it was a fantastic result. I think Richard was the first person who realized the potential value of long-distance balloon advertising. Before then, it was always a local. He brought it to the international arena. That is his skill. He sees the potential in things. He's a visionary.
Ya volvemos con...
Virgin Atlantic aprovechó al máximo su nueva fama. Los vuelos iban llenos. Todo mundo hablaba del toque de Virgin. Tarifas 30% más baratas, masajes, manicuristas y Richard Branson en persona como asistente de vuelo para impresionar a los pasajeros. 4, 6, 8 aviones. La flotilla creció rápidamente. El arrogante Branson payaseaba vestido de pirata, desafiando en público a British Airways. Quería quitarle la tercera parte de su clientela y British Airways se espantó. Con más de 200 aviones, la aerolínea nacional era un gigante en comparación con Virgin. Los directivos estaban furiosos de que les robaran clientes del bolsillo. En 1990, Richard Branson irritó aún más a British Airways, superándola en el escenario internacional. Era la época de la Guerra del Golfo. Saddam Hussein desafiaba a las fuerzas de la coalición. Retenía en Bagdad a algunos ciudadanos británicos para usarlos como escudos humanos.
You are British? All of you? Yes, this is a British family.
No tenía empacho en mostrar sus rehenes a la prensa. Las imágenes de este aterrado pequeño de 5 años impactaron a la opinión mundial.
Stuart, are you getting your milk, Stuart? Cornflakes. And with cornflakes too. Oh, that's good.
Al final, Saddam Hussein liberó a estos rehenes. Richard Branson propuso al gobierno británico enviar uno de sus propios aviones para traerlos de vuelta a casa. El fotógrafo Bill Rowntree fue uno de los pocos periodistas autorizados a acompañar a Branson en esta delicada misión.
I think he was aware that if it had gone wrong And, for example, the aircraft had been made to stay in Baghdad, or we'd been added to the list of hostages, or he'd been added to the list of hostages, as obviously as a high-profile person. So he certainly didn't think it was fun. He was taking it very seriously, and I think that's why he was anxious not to do anything that would upset the Iraqis or make it look like that I was there taking pictures to make them look foolish. That was never the object of the exercise. The main object was to get the hostages out and back to England as smoothly and as quickly as possible.
El aeropuerto de Bagdad. Richard Branson da la bienvenida a su avión a los 33 rehenes británicos. Tras 2 meses de cautiverio, fue un momento muy emotivo.
And everybody got on board, and the captain said, right, well, that's it. Let's go home.
I just would like to say that we've just crossed the Iraqi border.
Un golpe maestro del fundador de Virgin Atlantic.
He is a brilliant publicist, but at the same time, I think it's a situation where everybody benefits. The hostages came back to England. Richard got some publicity, and it was a genuine humanitarian gesture. I mean, I've known him do things that don't necessarily, get him splashed across the front pages every day. But I'm sure he was well aware that because of the bitterness between British Airways and Virgin Atlantic, that this would only be good publicity for him. And that was at the time, I think, what he wanted, as well as I said, helping the hostages and making sure they got home safely.
Un año después, Virgin Atlantic ganó el premio a la mejor aerolínea de 1991. Esto ya era el colmo para Lord King, el director de la poderosa British Airways. Juró en secreto hacer cuanto fuese necesario para hundir a Virgin Atlantic. Fue el inicio de una guerra soterrada de British Airways contra Virgin. Una campaña sucia, según la describió la prensa. Detectives privados, piratas informáticos, vigilancia. British Airways se valió de las herramientas del espionaje para ensuciar la reputación de Branson y desestabilizar a Virgin Atlantic. El cerebro de esta operación era Brian Basham, un asesor de Lord King. 25 años después accedió a hablar del episodio con ciertas condiciones.
My colleague is taking notes. Well, just so that we've got a record of what happened.
Okay.
All right?
To be sure of what?
But you're sure of your honesty. She's taking notes for me to be sure of your honesty. We've only met. You look like very nice people, but I want to make sure you're honest people. I've met a lot of dishonest people.
Su misión era sencilla. British Airways le encomendó hurgar en el lado oculto de Richard Branson.
My job at BA was to talk to anybody about what I had discovered about Branson. So in making a commercial assessment of Branson's business, it was vital to be able to understand where his cash was coming from. And it was coming from Heaven nightclub.
Este es el club para gays Heaven, en Londres. Una meca gay. Branson lo había comprado 10 años antes. Aprovechando la mala fama del club, Basham intentó difundir rumores en la prensa. Contactó a Chris Hutchins, un reportero de Today, un tabloide de chismes. Esta es su versión de los hechos.
The plan that Basham had, as far as I was concerned, was to get a story in the newspapers saying that Richard Branson, the head of Virgin, owned a nightclub which sold drugs. In other words, that Richard Branson was in the drug business. That's what BA wanted. And that would have ruined it, because the whole image of Virgin depended upon the image of Richard Branson.
El reportero contactó a Richard Branson para verificar cierta información. Convencido de su buena fe, le dijo de la investigación de British Airways. Entonces Branson le pidió un favor muy peculiar.
Branson called me constantly over that weekend. He called again and again and again. And finally he said to me, would you be prepared to go wired, wearing a tape recorder, so that I will have evidence of this conversation that this man, on behalf of British Airways, is going to have with you.
Chris Hutchins pensó que tendría una exclusiva, así que aceptó la propuesta de Richard Branson.
I recorded all this secretly. You know, I had this recording equipment packed away, and I was very nervous because when I arrived there, Brian Basham was cleaning a shotgun. He was cleaning a sporting shotgun, but it intimidated me, and I think that was probably the effect it was meant to have.
Durante una hora en casa de Brian Basham, el reportero grabó discretamente su conversación con el empleado de British Airways. Hablaron de Branson, el Club Heaven, drogas.
Of course I was trapped by... I was deceived by a journalist with extremely low standards and a man with extremely low morals.
Con el cassette, Branson tuvo por fin pruebas de las maniobras de British Airways en su contra. El escándalo estalló en la prensa días después. En Londres, Virgin demandó a British Airways por difamación. British Airways intentó arrastrarlo por el lodo, pero Branson se impuso al final. Virgin se tuerce a British Airways, fue el encabezado del Sun. La antigua aerolínea estatal tuvo que disculparse y pagar 610,000 libras, una cifra récord por daños y perjuicios. Lord King renunció. Branson era más popular que nunca. David había vencido a Goliath.
If we hadn't managed to persuade the journalists to do it, our business may have disappeared. I mean, we were fighting for our life, and we were fighting for the company's life and the 5,000 people who work for Virgin.
Richard Branson ganó la batalla por la opinión pública, pero la campaña sucia le había costado caro en gastos legales y pérdida de clientela. En 1992, Branson estaba endeudado. No habiendo alternativa, vendió Virgin Music, la disquera que lo había hecho rico. EMI compró por $1,000 millones la joya de la corona de Virgin.
And quite bizarrely, passing the signs which said, Branson sells for $1 billion, and tears streaming down my face. But it's not an easy thing to do. But now, for the first time in my life, we had some money, and we were, in a sense, ready then to take Virgin on a global, on a global mission, and we really, in a sense, set Virgin up into lots of different areas all over the world.
La venta de Virgin Music fue un giro peligroso para la empresa. Así lo recuerda Will Whitehorn, el brazo derecho de Branson.
Virgin Atlantic was a good business with good prospects, deserved to survive, and we needed the strength to go out and be able to talk to the market. We couldn't even buy new planes at that time because Airbus and Boeing wouldn't talk to us because basically BA had convinced them we were going to go bankrupt. So it was very important to have a war chest of financing available to grow Virgin Atlantic. So in my view, Richard took the right decision, and I think it was a difficult one for him because many of his friends worked for Virgin Records. But he made a lot of effort to make sure the staff were looked after well. And I think in a way it was also the making of the growth of the Virgin brand around the world.
A mediados de los 90, Virgin Atlantic transportaba 1,5 millones de pasajeros al año. En 10 años, el imperio Virgin se había vuelto un caleidoscopio de 353 compañías, un surtido muy variado. Virgin vendía vodka, pero era también el principal operador de trenes en Gran Bretaña. 300 megatiendas en el mundo, bancos y hasta vestidos de novia. Branson hacía su papel para el público, pero a menudo era puro show. Muchos de sus negocios estaban perdiendo dinero. Virgin Cola, por ejemplo. En 1998, Branson declaró la guerra a la Coca-Cola de manera espectacular en su propio terreno. Llegó en un tanque a Nueva York para aplastar cientos de latas de Coca-Cola. Pero Virgin Cola fue un fracaso. Las pérdidas sumaron 45 millones de euros.
We learned that the place for us to be is not sitting on supermarket shelves. Virgin is more about service. It's more about ideas. So it's more about providing something that people feel is good value for money. It's about providing with content where, they can feel there is more of an interest in it. It's about looking after the customer and making sure that they're not being ripped off. And putting our name on physical products in the supermarket clearly was not going to be for us. That's what we learned from Virgin Cola.
It's not everything he touches turns to gold, but I don't think these... I mean, he hates it when a company fails, but, you know, it doesn't stop him. Even if everything failed, it wouldn't bother him. He would start another thing, and that would succeed. He would just keep going, because he's always been like that. Very high energy.
El periodista británico Tom Bauer, que investigó a Virgin durante varios años, ve al multimillonario como un gran jugador de póker que nunca deja ver su juego.
Is a juggler. In other words, he's constantly got many, many businesses and attempts at businesses going simultaneously. And his object is that one or two of them will produce the bonanza, will produce the huge windfall, the huge amount of money, and the others will fail. He doesn't mind.
Nada podía detener al audaz empresario. En 2001 lanzó Virgin Mobile en el Reino Unido, con un sistema de tarjetas de prepago. Después extendió el servicio a Francia.
Ya volvemos con...
Abril 2006. La megatienda Virgin de los Campos Elíseos en París. Richard Branson está en el 6º piso. Como siempre, no usa traje y corbata. Va a lanzar su marca de telefonía celular en Francia con su propia receta para hacer de sí mismo un espectáculo. El evento se anunció en la prensa, pero nadie sabe qué locura hará el magnate esta vez.
La corde le reprend tout de suite.
It never gets loose.
I'm not doing anything. Okay.
It never gets loose.
So I'm in your control. C'est moi qui contrôle.
All right. Okay.
Thank you.
Esta vez es un doble de acción. 30 metros abajo, fanáticos, periodistas y transeúntes se apretujan para poder ver al empresario estrella. A sus 56 años, Branson está dispuesto a actuar como marioneta pendiendo de un hilo. Como siempre, Branson se divierte haciendo negocios. Ese es el toque Virgin. Es una marca joven y sexy, y así debe percibirse. Con tanta alaraca, es comprensible que la gente olvide que aquí de lo que se trata es de hacer negocios. Branson dedica el resto del día a dar entrevistas de radio y televisión. Seguimos con el paseo.
Yeah. And you've got to try to get on the front pages instead of the back pages. It's the only way your business is going to survive. And I think that I've managed to use myself to project Virgin. To let people know that Virgin exists.
El jefe de Virgin visita todos los estudios de televisión, uno tras otro.
How do you do? Nice to meet you too. Oh, it is mine.
Yeah, thank you.
You had quite a tough journey, don't you? Tough day?
Not too bad.
Not too bad? Okay.
Well looked after.
You know that we're doing the interview in French.
Of course.
But you will have, here, I don't know how to call it in English.
Quiso coincidir con el lanzamiento de Virgin Mobile la publicación de su autobiografía. Otra buena manera de hacer que la gente hable de Virgin.
Bonjour, et merci d'être avec nous ce matin. Vous présentez cet ouvrage qui est votre autobiographie, qui est un gros pavé. Il a fallu quand même, attendez, je regarde, 600 pages pour résumer une vie, c'est quand même beaucoup.
En 30 ans, il a bâti un empire autour de sa marque fétiche, Virgin, une réussite aux allures de saga pour le moins conformiste des patrons anglais. Son credo, s'amuser en travaillant. Richard Branson est l'invité de ce soir 3.
La fascinación de la prensa es una bendición para el supervendedor de la marca Virgin.
In the day, as you know, I've done many interviews, and by the end of the day, hopefully people would have seen, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 interviews, and that can make a big difference. And I think, if I didn't do the interviews, then it would be much more difficult, I think, for the mobile phone company to become successful.
A la mañana siguiente, Branson acaparó la prensa de negocios. Lo hizo de nuevo, pero su operativo aún no terminaba. A las 8 de la mañana, en la estación del norte, el magnate emprende el regreso a Londres.
We changed our agenda because rather an exciting deal is going to be announced in England.
De hecho, Branson simplemente canceló Virgin Mobile por el 10% de una televisora británica. Menos de 24 horas después del lanzamiento en Francia, vendió su compañía de telefonía celular en Inglaterra. Un truco de magia que se reduce, según el propio prestidigitador, a esta pequeña carpeta.
Inside here is the deal which we're signing today. You know, it's one of the biggest deals we've ever done. You know, we started Virgin Mobile only 5 years ago. It's now a $2 billion company, so we've created that from nothing. And then using that financial leverage, we've managed to move into television. Taking on the French market yesterday and coming back and taking on the television market in England. It's a good day.
En unos meses, la nueva criatura de Richard Branson será un canal de televisión con el nombre de Virgin. Fue un buen día. Él se embolsó 123 millones de libras.
Thank you.
I've read your book. It's fantastic.
Oh, thank you for that.
Television.
Oh, thank you very much. Nice to see you. Thanks a lot.
Sir Richard Branson se ha convertido en el empresario más popular del Reino Unido. Posee la 10ª mayor fortuna del país, pero sus miles de millones nunca le parecen suficientes. De vuelta a la isla Necker. Hasta su mansión de $60 millones es una pequeña compañía, quizá la más sorprendente del imperio Virgin. Le interesa mucho mostrar esta cinta porque también es el hotelero de las estrellas.
Most famous people have been to Necker Island. I mean, from Bill Gates to Spielberg to Warren Beatty to, I don't know, you name it. Most people have been here, I think, at some stage or another. 12 months a year, it's always busy, yeah.
And how much is it to spend a week here?
It's about what's it? About $1,500 a day per person, but that includes food and drink and everything. But not too bad, but it's not, you know, it's not cheap either.
Si bien le gusta pavonearse frente a las cámaras, su contabilidad es un enigma. El grupo Virgin no cotiza públicamente. Algo muy extraño para una multinacional con 35,000 empleados alrededor del mundo. Al empresario aventurero nunca se le agotan las ideas. Una de sus obsesiones más recientes es desarrollar el turismo espacial.
So this is the spaceship itself here. This is the mothership that takes it into space. And then when it gets up to 50,000 feet, the spaceship drops away. And off she goes.
Where are the tourists?
They'll be sitting in here.
The last time I spoke to him, he was talking about actually taking people to the moon. And that's typical of Richard, you know? It's like, yeah, that's really something that's new. That's really something that would somehow change the way we feel about ourselves and everything. If we can get on a spaceship and we can go to the moon.
Es sin duda el proyecto más alocado de Richard Branson. Vender viajes al espacio. Virgin Galactic ofrece vuelos suborbitales por $200,000. Y sí funciona. 450 clientes ya reservaron un lugar.
That would be very risky for us. And Richard would now be inclined to only take that risk if there was a very, very, very good return and a very good chance of the thing really being groundbreaking. The space project is a good example of that. That's been a project that clearly is a great concept. The technology that we have developed for manned spaceflight is unique and is new technology, launching a rocket from the edge of space, from an aeroplane, instead of launching it from the ground, like Ariane does. Is a really interesting, it's actually a very old concept from the beginnings of the space race that was abandoned a long time ago. But if we can make this business work, we can do so many things with it. And it's very complementary to us, but it's risky. We're at the cutting edge of technological development with this project. And it's not going to be cheap, but we believe there's a market for it. And we believe that if we make a success of it, we will become a world leader in this area.
En 2011, Richard Branson asistió a la inauguración del aeropuerto espacial en el desierto de Nuevo México. Mientras espera su turno para volar al espacio, el rey del Imperio Virgin, de 62 años, dedica la mitad de su tiempo a instituciones benéficas.
I think that Richard Branson was important in building the Virgin brand, and I've used myself to put the Virgin brand on the map on a global basis, whether it's through ballooning or boating or interviews or stunts or whatever. But now I think the Virgin brand is established, and so, if my boat sinks, my balloon pops, or the spaceship blows up, or whatever, I think that Virgin can live on without me. They may have to spend a bit more money on advertising, but I think they'll be able to live on without me.